saying is you can't carry a gun in town.
I have 2 guns.
You die first, get it?
Oh, God, don't tell me.
I don't think it'll ever get any better than it was on this film.
After 32 years, one of Hollywood's most beloved westerns has been hiding something in plain sight.
Did anything I could drunk on and sleep it off. Get the goddamn hands off me!
Tombstone wasn't just a gritty shootout between Wyatt Earp and the Cowboys. It was a battlefield of egos, secret betrayals, and behind-the-scenes sabotage that nearly tore the movie apart.
So we should say, for people who don't understand, that you weren't auditioning for a film. You were auditioning for a contract. And that's how it worked.
$85 a week is what it paid.
For decades, the cast and crew kept their mouths shut, but now the truth is finally spilling. Was the film we all know and love almost destroyed from within? And who's really to blame? Let's find out. For decades, Tombstone was worshipped as the ultimate Western, packed with gunfights, grit, and lines fans can quote in their sleep. But here's what almost no one realized back then. Behind the mustaches, smoke, and legends, a secret was hiding in plain sight.
I was paying $85 a month rent, and I lived right out the back gate on Tennessee, right out the back gate of Fox.
And now, Sam Elliott himself has broken the silence, dropping a revelation that doesn't just surprise, it shatters the way you thought about the film. His confession isn't just emotional, it raises questions Hollywood probably hoped you'd never ask. When Tombstone first began shooting, Sam Elliott was thrilled to step into the role of Virgil Earp. He believed in the story, trusted the cast, and admired the vision of director Kevin Jarre. From the start, Jarre had his fingerprints on everything, shaping lines, handpicking the cast, even deciding how every mustache and spur should look. Elliott respected that control, but almost immediately, he noticed something was wrong. By day 3, it was clear. Jarre was struggling. The shots weren't clicking. Instead of delivering the gritty energy the story demanded, Jarre leaned into old-fashioned wide shots. Pretty, yes, but lifeless for what Tombstone was supposed to be. The tension on set grew sharper with every take. Jarre resisted advice, even from legendary cinematographer William Fraker.
I was a professional actor as soon as I started getting paid.
Right.
And when I worked a little bit. Most kids under the contract didn't work.
Elliott admired Jarre's script and never wanted to undercut him, but he couldn't ignore what was happening. The cast and crew could all feel it. If something didn't change, the heart of the film might be lost. Then came the blow no one expected. Kevin Jarre was fired after only a month. For the team, it was like losing the captain of a ship mid-voyage. The man who had written every word and built this world was suddenly gone, leaving behind heartbreak and unease. In his place came George P. Cosmatos, a director who had mere days to catch up and take control. To the cast, though, it was obvious. Cosmatos wasn't steering the ship alone. Whispers spread that someone else, someone bigger, was quietly pulling the strings. And Elliott knew the set would never feel the same again.
That's one of the things my dad taught me. Always do more, even if it's just a little more. Always do a little more than it's expected of you.
It was then that Kurt Russell quietly stepped into a leadership role. While George P. Cosmatos wore the director's title, it was Kurt who began meeting privately with cast and crew, streamlining scenes, and even drafting nightly shot lists to keep the film from unraveling. Sam Elliott backed him fully. In those tense days, it wasn't Cosmatos steering the ship, it was Russell. For Elliott, the cuts hurt. Nearly 30 pages of connective scenes and emotional beats were stripped away, depth that would have given Virgil Earp a stronger presence. Looking back, Sam admitted he might have turned the role down if he had known how much of Virgil's heart would vanish in the edit. But he stayed for the story, for the cast, and for Kurt's determination to see the movie through.
The one in The Big Lebowski was a good one.
Sometimes you eat the bar and
Sometimes the bar.
Elliott quietly fought for Virgil. Even as reshoots clipped away lines and reshaped arcs, he slipped bits of dialogue back in, ensuring his character still carried weight. The cast rallied together, keeping Jarre's vision alive in fragments, while Russell pushed to protect the emotional spine, especially the bond between Wyatt and Doc. When Tombstone finally reached theaters, Sam carried mixed feelings. He was proud of what they had saved, but haunted by what had been lost. Virgil Earp, he believed, could have been so much more. Still, he never regretted staying the course. To him, the film became a battle scar, a testament to loyalty, survival, and the hidden truth that Tombstone was not just George Cosmatos' film, it was Kurt Russell's.
You know when all the elements come together, you know when it's on the page, and you have guys like Kurt Russell and Bill Paxton and Val Kilmer. the cast in that film alone.
And here's where the real controversy begins. Kevin Jarre, the man who birthed the story, had been cast aside. His old-school vision, sweeping wide shots, rigid staging, and stubborn detail collided head-on with Hollywood's demand for speed, close-ups, and adrenaline. Disney's Christmas release deadline left no room for error. By day 3, Sam Elliott saw it. The film was slipping, and Jarre was doomed. Sam Elliott could see it happening in real time. Kevin Jarre, brilliant on paper but green behind the camera, was unraveling. He was too stubborn to take advice. Even from William Fraker, a cinematographer with decades of experience. Shots dragged, setups stalled, and the production slipped further behind schedule. By the end of the first month, the studio and producer Andrew Vajna had lost patience. Jarre wasn't eased out. He was cut out. No farewell, no send-off, just gone.
I've never thought of myself as a kid playing Cowboys. All that said, I don't know an actor that doesn't want to do a Western either.
What came next was far from smooth. To outsiders, George P. Cosmatos was the man hired to steady the ship. But inside the set, everyone knew it was Kurt Russell quietly taking control. He didn't just act, he dictated the tone of the film. He and producer James Jack slashed 30 pages from Jarre's script, gutting entire subplots and backstories. Their goal, put the spotlight squarely on Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday. The fallout was immediate. Cast members whispered among themselves, dubbing the reworked movie The Kurt and Val Show. Suddenly, actors like Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, and Powers Booth, who had signed on for layered ensemble roles, saw their characters reduced to background noise. The heart of Jarre's vision, family bonds, shared values, emotional arcs, was stripped for a faster, flashier story about two men. Sam took it hard. Virgil Earp wasn't just a sidekick to him, he was the moral backbone of the family. Losing 30 pages meant losing Virgil's voice. Privately, Sam admitted that if he had known how drastically his role would be cut, he might have turned it down altogether. And yet he stayed. Out of loyalty? Out of hope? Maybe both. But Elliott and others didn't just sit back. In quiet rebellion, they began sneaking lines from Jarre's original script back into scenes. Tiny acts of resistance to keep their characters alive. Sam protected moments he believed audiences deserved, even if the studio didn't.
I've had that question asked so many times, and it's so hard to answer because, if you have good fortune enough to have been in some decent films along the road.
One night, the frustration spilled into the open. At a bar after filming, someone told Elliott, "You should have played Wyatt." He took a slow sip of his beer, his eyes heavy with resignation, and replied, "Tell me about it." That single remark said it all. His disappointment, his longing, and the unspoken truth that the movie had been reshaped into something far different than promised. When Tombstone finally hit theaters, it was hailed as a gritty, fast-paced Western, but insiders knew the cost. Whole arcs were butchered, emotional threads severed, and supporting stars muted so two actors could shine. What was sold to the public as a legendary ensemble was, behind the curtain, a power play. And Sam Elliott had been caught in the crossfire. Sam Elliott stayed loyal through the chaos. He didn't storm off set or make a scene, but anyone watching closely could see the weight in his eyes. His silence spoke louder than words. It was the silence of a man who knew the story he'd signed on for was slipping away. And he wasn't the only one who felt it. Michael Biehn later admitted that the movie was supposed to be about a community, a tapestry of lives in Tombstone, not just a two-man duel. Powers Booth and Bill Paxton echoed that frustration, quietly acknowledging how much of their work had been chopped away. Jarre's original script had been sprawling, rich, alive. The final product was sharper, but also emptier.
And there are obviously things that stand out about all of them. I think what I remember most about films is the people that I've worked with rather than the film itself.
Still, Sam refused to give up. He held Virgil together with scraps of dialogue, a steady stance, a nod here and there, tiny rebellions against a system that had already decided which characters mattered most. What made it to screen was only a sliver of Jarre's filmed vision. By some counts, fewer than 15 of his original moments survived intact. That's when the whispers began. Everyone knew George P. Cosmatos had been hired to save the production. But on set, the truth was different. Cosmatos wasn't leading. He was following orders. orders written every night by Kurt Russell himself. Each evening, Russell sat down, rewrote the next day's game plan, and handed Cosmatos the shot list before sunrise. Cosmatos would arrive on set, script in hand, and direct as if it were his own. To the outside world, he was in charge. To the cast and crew, it was obvious. Kurt was calling the shots. Val Kilmer later confirmed it outright. He saw Russell bleed for the movie, giving up sleep, sacrificing his own preparation as Wyatt to ensure Tombstone didn't collapse. But that sacrifice came at a cost. By ghost directing, Kurt also reshaped the film around himself and Val. Together, they became the twin sons of Tombstone, while everyone else orbited in their shadow.
I sure ain't gonna show you my dick.
You too, donkey dicks.
To some, Kurt's takeover was heroic. He saved a sinking ship. To others, it was a quiet coup, a cover-up even. Kevin Jarre had created the world, George Cosmatos wore the title. But Kurt Russell was the one steering the film. And Hollywood has never been comfortable admitting just how much of Tombstone was really his. Val Kilmer's commitment was absolute. He even crashed on Kurt Russell's couch just so they could spend every spare moment plotting how to salvage the film. The result? Doc Holliday ended up with some of the sharpest, most unforgettable lines of the movie. But here's the kicker. Kilmer never complained about the imbalance. He laughed with Kurt, worked with him, and together they reshaped the emotional core of Tombstone. Michael Biehn, however, didn't see it the same way. Playing Johnny Ringo, he later admitted that while Kurt didn't direct him outright, it was impossible to deny who was really running the show. Everyone knew Kurt saved the film, Biehn confessed, but he also hinted at the truth no one wanted to say too loud. The final credit for George P. Cosmatos was more political than accurate. Behind closed doors, Tombstone had become a committee project, but Kurt Russell was the one steering the committee.
A lot of them are gone today. But that cast and that script, it just doesn't get any better than that.
Even online, the legend has only grown. Fans on Reddit dissect the whispers of Kurt's secret notes, the late-night shot lists, and his uncredited control over production. What was sold to the public as Cosmatos' vision was, in reality, Russell's fingerprints on every frame. The studio wanted a savior they could credit. Kurt wanted the movie saved, period. And in the end, he got his way, even if it meant stepping into the shadows to avoid scandal. But things weren't all calm. The set was charged with tension, and not just creative differences. Actual physical fights broke out. Cinematographer William Fraker, a Hollywood veteran, found himself at odds with both Jarre and Cosmatos. Jarre had been stubborn to the point of paralysis, and when Cosmatos took over, he demanded discipline with a military edge. Their arguments boiled over so badly that at one point, they literally rammed golf carts into each other out of pure frustration. Crew members threatened to quit. 17 actually did. Fraker himself tried to walk away 3 times, but was pulled back by producer James Jacks and his loyalty to the project. Meanwhile, the budget was spiraling out of control. What started as a $25 million production blew past its limit, all while Disney's Christmas Day release date loomed like a guillotine. The studio wasn't interested in excuses. They wanted a marketable hit on time, no matter the cost. That meant reshoots, rewrites, and brutal cuts. Most of Jarre's filmed work was trashed. Whole character arcs, like the townsfolk's struggles, the Earp's family life, and quieter moments of humor were ripped away. Charlton Heston's cameo barely survived.
Put him up at my place, as long as it's just tonight.
Cosmatos leaned into spectacle, staging an elaborate wedding opener and pumping up the action-packed finale. The days stretched into endless back-breaking shoots. By the end of 88 grueling days, the cast and crew were exhausted, bruised, and burnt out. But the studio had its movie, leaner, faster, and angrier than Jarre ever intended. The final Tombstone wasn't the one Kevin Jarre dreamed of. It wasn't even really George Cosmatos' film. It was a patchwork born of clashes, compromises, and a quiet coup led by Kurt Russell. The result? A modern Western classic built out of chaos, betrayal, and the kind of behind-the-scenes warfare Hollywood prefers to bury.
And I don't think it'll ever get any better than it was on this film. You know, it just was on all sides of the camera.
And here's the real sting. While fans saw only the finished legend, those who lived it still remember the fights, the cuts, and the rivalries that nearly tore Tombstone apart. When Tombstone was racing toward release in 1993, another Wyatt Earp film was already circling like a vulture, Kevin Costner's Wyatt Earp. What followed wasn't just a box office rivalry, it was an all-out Hollywood street fight. Here's the shocking part. Costner was originally offered the lead in Tombstone, but he turned it down to put push his own passion project instead. And from that moment on, he didn't just walk away, he allegedly tried to bury Tombstone alive. Costner reportedly used his massive Hollywood influence to pressure studios into refusing to distribute the movie. He even worked through his agency to tighten the noose, making Tombstone look like a sinking ship before it ever left port. The sabotage didn't stop there. In what crew members later described as a costume land grab, Costner allegedly locked down nearly every Western outfit and prop in Hollywood, leaving Tombstone scrambling for authenticity. The desperate team eventually sourced wardrobe from Europe, a wild twist that, ironically, mirrored the real Tombstone townsfolk, who also imported their clothes overseas.
It was, it was a labor of love for a lot of people. And I think in the end that we pulled it off with a piece of really good entertainment. And
all odds, Disney's Buena Vista stepped in, giving Tombstone the lifeline it needed. And what happened next is the part Hollywood doesn't like to talk about. Tombstone premiered on Christmas Eve, built on a modest $25 million budget, and became a smash hit, grossing over $56 million domestically and $76 million worldwide. Meanwhile, Costner's bloated $63 million Wyatt Earp arrived 6 months later and flopped hard. Critics slammed it as slow, joyless, and self-indulgent. Roger Ebert even joked it felt like someone had pumped Tombstone full of hot air. Costner's epic couldn't even recoup its budget, limping away with just $55.9 million worldwide. Fans haven't forgotten either. To this day, Reddit threads accuse Costner of blacklisting Tombstone and hoarding costumes in an attempt to choke it out. But the attempt backfired spectacularly, cementing Tombstone as a cult classic while Wyatt Earp became a cautionary tale.
You weren't auditioning for a film. You were auditioning for a contract. And that's how it worked.
$85 a week is what it paid. I was paying $85 a month rent.
Even Costner himself later admitted he regretted going head-to-head with Tombstone, but by then, the damage was done. His sabotage had only made his rival's victory more legendary. In the Hollywood retelling of Tombstone, most people walk away remembering Val Kilmer's flamboyant Doc Holliday or Kurt Russell's hard-charging Wyatt Earp, but buried in the dust and gunsmoke is Sam Elliott's Virgil Earp, a character often sidelined despite being the true backbone of the story. And here's the controversial part. If you strip away the flashy lines and the stage bravado, it's Virgil, not Wyatt or Doc, who emerges as the real moral center of the film. The tragedy is that Elliott's contribution has been consistently overshadowed, both in pop culture memory and even within the production itself. While Wyatt is painted as the reluctant hero and Doc as the tortured outlaw genius, Virgil is reduced to a background player. Hollywood, as it so often does, chose charisma over conscience. But Elliott himself didn't see Virgil that way. He deliberately built him as a man of steadiness and responsibility, not a gunslinger looking for glory. Unlike Wyatt, who often seems dragged along by ego, Virgil embraces law and order because he knows chaos destroys communities.
You die first, get it? Your friends might get me in a rut.
One moment proves this more than any shootout. Before bullets fly, Virgil snatches a child out of harm's way. It's a blink and you miss it beat, but it cuts to the heart of his character. This isn't about proving he's the fastest draw. It's about protecting the powerless. And yet, how many retrospectives even mention it? Instead, we get endless montages of Doc coughing blood and Wyatt yelling, "You tell him I'm coming," because those play better in trailers. Here's where the controversy sharpens. Tombstone may have gotten its cultural memory wrong. The film lionizes Wyatt, but Elliott's Virgil is the one who actually embodies the nobility Hollywood pretends to celebrate. Virgil chastises his brothers for chasing conflict, warning that when fear rules the streets, the town loses its soul. That's not just a throwaway line, it's the entire philosophy the movie claims to stand on. But instead of honoring this, the spotlight goes to the swaggering anti-heroes. And that raises an uncomfortable question. Did Hollywood bury Virgil's importance because his quiet strength didn't fit the myth? Did audiences ignore Elliott's layered performance because it lacked the fireworks of Kilmer's flamboyance? The answer may sting, but it forces us to admit something about our obsession with cinematic heroes. We prefer spectacle over substance.
And Spicer leans forward and he says, "Well, you can't have a
without a witness.
Watch Elliot closely. His body language is weary but unbreakable. His voice is deliberate, not desperate. He doesn't dramatize, he commands. He brings gravity to a film otherwise teetering on the edge of melodrama. Scholars now recognize this as the grounding influence that prevented Tombstone from collapsing under its own camp. But back in 1993, most audiences didn't see it, or didn't want to. And maybe that's the real controversy. Tombstone isn't really about Wyatt Earp's destiny or Doc Holliday's legend. It's about Virgil Earp's burden, carried by an actor Hollywood has too often undervalued. Sam Elliott didn't just play the quiet brother. He held up the entire film. The fact that it took decades for people to notice might say more about us than it does about him. One critic once wrote that Sam Elliott's weathered face and commanding presence embodied the moral weight of frontier justice. And yet, despite those words, Hollywood still treated him like background noise. Why? Because Elliott didn't play the kind of hero studios wanted to sell. He didn't roar, he didn't posture, he stood silent. But that silence was the glue holding Tombstone together, the heartbeat under all the gunfire.
You know, as Brett said earlier, that's the world we live in. You know, we're not curing anything, but hopefully some people's ills once in a while, you know.
The problem is, most people missed it. Ask the average fan and they'll gush about Doc Holliday's one-liners, Wyatt's furious speeches, or the OK Corral showdown. They'll say Tombstone is about loyalty, revenge, and the thrill of brotherhood under fire. But when the dust settles, what lingers isn't Kilmer's coughing or Russell's scowl. It's Elliott's quiet sorrow. His Virgil isn't chasing glory. He's carrying responsibility. He reminds us that true bravery isn't in shooting fastest, but in stepping up when no one else will. Here's the controversial twist. Elliott didn't even want to come back to Hollywood at the time. He had drifted into semi-retirement, tired of how the industry sidelined men like him, actors with grit, not glamour. But Virgil called to him. He said himself that the role reflected his own values, his own sense of duty. So why did the studios bury that performance under flashy marketing for Wyatt and Doc? Because Hollywood knows what sells, and a tired, burdened lawman doesn't fit the action figure mold. If you look closely, Virgil is the film's moral compass. He sees the broken streets, the lawlessness, and acts not out of anger, but out of obligation. That's what elevates Tombstone beyond a popcorn western. But here's the irony. The very thing that made the film timeless, the layer of justice, restraint, and sorrow, wasn't what Hollywood pushed. They sold the spectacle. They let Elliott's contribution get lost in the noise. And decades later, audiences are still waking up to the fact that Tombstone's soul belonged to him all along.
Give them a chuckle, give them a laugh, and let them shed a tear maybe, and give them their money's worth, you know.
So when someone tells you Tombstone was just about action, you can call that what it is, a myth carefully packaged for mass appeal. The truth runs deeper. Elliott's Virgil was the moral anchor. Without him, the story collapses. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. But here's where things get really interesting, because behind the cameras, the battles weren't just happening on screen. There were clashes over control, over credit, and over who really shaped Tombstone into the classic we remember. And those fights, they reveal why Hollywood's version of the story doesn't match what actually happened. In 1993, a Western called Tombstone exploded into theaters and became an instant cult classic. They weren't the only ones who made Tombstone unforgettable. Supporting actors like Bill Paxton, Powers Booth, Michael Biehn, Dana Delaney, Michael Rooker, and even Charlton Heston in a Blink and You'll Miss It cameo filled the screen with energy. This wasn't just a star vehicle for Kurt Russell or Val Kilmer. On paper, it was meant to be a living, breathing portrait of a frontier town. Writer Kevin Jarre, who also intended to direct, had a vision far bigger than simple gunfights. His script was about families, friendships, rivalries, and moral dilemmas. An old West where the small, quiet moments mattered just as much as the bullets.
I'm there, but you're barking up the wrong tree.
You know you men are making love.
Jarre's approach was ambitious, maybe too ambitious. He wanted sweeping historical detail, dinners that revealed family dynamics, conversations that exposed the cost of power, and standoffs that weren't just about who could draw faster, but about who was willing to stand for something. He wanted realism, not Hollywood gloss. Production designer Catherine Hardwicke backed him up, building a 12-acre replica of Tombstone down to the last nail. It was immersive, authentic, the kind of obsessive accuracy that could have set the film apart. heart. The actors bought into that vision. Kurt Russell trained like a real frontier lawman, learning revolver mechanics, handling his guns until it was second nature. Val Kilmer transformed himself, perfecting Doc Holliday's frail body and southern drawl. The supporting cast dug into accents, mannerisms, even town records. Everyone was gearing up for something that looked like it might be the most historically faithful Western Hollywood had ever made. But then came the chaos. Behind the scenes, Kevin Jarre was drowning. It was his first time directing and wrangling a massive cast. A 60-building set and big action sequences quickly spiraled out of his control. Schedules slipped, tensions rose, and the studio, already nervous about competing with Kevin Costner's rival project Wyatt Earp, started to panic. Disney, which had picked up distribution, wanted a Christmas release. They wanted a marketable, shoot-'em-up Western with swagger and quotable lines, not a history lesson about family dinners and moral choices.
Again, it gets back to that commitment thing that I was talking to you before. I think an actor's job is just to find the way. And it doesn't mean that his way is the way.
So after just a month of filming, the studio stepped in and made the call. Kevin Jarre was out. His dream of an ensemble drama that showed the heart and soul of Tombstone was gutted. What came next would completely change the film, sometimes for the better, but also at the cost of Jarre's original vision. And here's the controversial question that still lingers decades later. Was Tombstone saved by the studio's interference, or was Kevin Jarre robbed of what could have been the most ambitious Western of its era? Kevin Jarre was out, and in came George P. Cosmatos, the director brought in to fix the mess. On paper, Cosmatos had the credentials, known for his slick, commanding visuals. But his arrival wasn't a miracle cure. In fact, it sparked new problems. Cinematographer William Fraker and other crew members clashed with the sudden shift in pace and tone. The atmosphere on set turned toxic, with some crew threatening to walk away altogether. And this is where the controversy deepens. While Cosmatos held the official title of director, insiders later revealed that Kurt Russell himself was quietly pulling the strings. He was the one writing nightly call sheets, coordinating the schedule, and steering performances, all behind the scenes. Cosmatos may have been the figurehead, but many believe Russell was the true director of Tombstone. To this day, Hollywood hasn't fully reckoned with how much credit Russell deserves, or whether Cosmatos was merely a front to keep the studio happy.
We're all there to serve the director. At least that's what I've always been. That's always been my kind of mantra. We're all, the director is the captain of the ship.
The cast, meanwhile, held the production together with grit. Sam Elliott, Bill Paxton, Powers Booth, and others doubled down, trying to preserve pieces of Jarre's original character work. They even slipped lost lines back into their scenes to save what they could of the old script. Michael Biehn nearly quit when Jarre was fired, disgusted at the way things were handled. But in the end, he stayed, realizing the film, even in chaos, was still worth salvaging. Other moments came alive almost by accident. Billy Bob Thornton, still years away from stardom, showed up as a hot-headed bully in a short but unforgettable scene that elevated Wyatt's authority. The gunfight at the OK Corral, one of the movie's centerpiece moments, required dozens of stunt performers and endless takes to get the choreography right. And Doc Holliday's now legendary dialogue, much of it wasn't even scripted. Val Kilmer improvised, and those unscripted moments became some of the most quoted lines in Western history. Even the facial hair became a battleground for authenticity. Every major actor grew a real mustache, except John Tenney, who had to wear a fake because of another project. It sounds minor, but details like that mattered in a film that wanted to ooze authenticity from every pore. After 88 grueling days of shooting, the cameras finally stopped rolling in August 1993. But the chaos didn't end there. Post-production was a sprint, not a marathon. Disney wanted a Christmas release, and that meant editors were forced to work at breakneck speed, slashing scenes, tightening sound, and scrambling through reshoots. What audiences saw in December was less a carefully polished epic and more a miracle of rushed deadlines and behind-the-scenes power struggles. And yet, despite the turmoil, the firings, the hidden leadership, and the studio's meddling, Tombstone survived. Some would even say it triumphed, though the truth of who really made the film remains one of Hollywood's most whispered controversies. On December 24th, Tombstone finally hit theaters, an unusual Christmas Eve release that many thought would bury the film against holiday blockbusters. Instead, it struck gold. Audiences latched onto Val Kilmer's razor-sharp sharp wit, with so many of his lines entering pop culture that they've become part of everyday conversation. Kurt Russell's fiery, relentless Wyatt Earp gave the film its driving energy, while Sam Elliott's restrained, weathered Virgil slowly earned the respect he deserved, long after the dust of opening weekend had settled. But here's the part nobody expected. A film plagued by firings, near walkouts, and hidden power struggles didn't just survive, it redefined the Western. Tombstone fused clever dialogue with layered characters and a modern style that made it feel alive, not like a relic. In doing so, it revived a dying genre and proved that Westerns could still dominate theaters. Decades later, its grip hasn't loosened. It's still ranked among the greatest Westerns ever made, celebrated as both a cult classic and a mainstream hit. New additions, including a long-awaited 4K release in April 2025, continue to dig deeper into its tangled history. Special features and restored footage promise a closer look at Kevin Jarre's original vision, Kurt Russell's rumored behind-the-scenes leadership, and the compromises that shaped the final cut. And there you have it. After more than 3 decades, Tombstone's biggest secret finally crawls out of the shadows. What the world thought was a smooth, heroic Western about lawmen and outlaws was actually born out of chaos, sabotage, and backstabbing that would put the OK Corral itself to shame. The truth? This movie didn't just survive gunfights on screen, it barely survived the war behind the cameras. For years, Hollywood packaged Tombstone as a story of brotherhood, Kurt Russell's determination, Val Kilmer's brilliance, Sam Elliott's gravitas. But now we know that, off-camera, there were rivalries so toxic that they threatened to derail the entire production. We're talking about late-night shouting matches, sudden firings, and power grabs that were swept under the rug. If the public had known then what we're uncovering now, some of the very names we idolize might not have made it out of the 1990s with their careers intact. Think about it. 32 years of silence, 32 years of red carpets, award shows, interviews where everyone smiled and acted like family. And all the while, the truth was locked away, because admitting what really happened would have exposed the ugly side of an industry built on illusion. The studio didn't want a scandal. The stars didn't want their reputations tarnished. So the story stayed buried until now. And here's the part that makes your skin crawl. If this much dirt has finally slipped out, how much more is still being hidden? How many careers were quietly sabotaged so someone else could shine? How many creative differences were really cover-ups for backroom betrayals? Because when you strip it down, Tombstone wasn't just a fight between Wyatt Earp and the Cowboys. It was a battle of egos, power, and survival in Hollywood. The film we all love exists not because everything went right, but because enough people were willing to look the other way. That's the real legacy. And maybe that's why the film feels so raw, so authentic. Maybe the blood, sweat, and bitterness behind the scenes bled onto the screen in ways we never noticed. But don't be fooled. The smoke hasn't fully cleared. If one secret can stay hidden for 32 years, there's no telling what else is still locked away in the vaults of Hollywood history. So the next time you watch Tombstone and hear Doc Holliday whisper, "I'm your Huckleberry," just remember there's a darker story lurking underneath the one you think you know. And trust me, this might not be the last skeleton to come rattling out of that desert. That's it for today. See you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.